Today I turned this old and quite boring black tank top into this cool crop top. I wanted to cut out a diagonal part of the top and replace it with a cool mesh fabric. For that, first I needed to determine where exactly I wanted to cut something out. I took my chalk pen and directly traced 2 lines onto the top while I was still wearing it. At this point, the lines don't need to be perfect yet. To even the lines out, I took a ruler and put it where the initial line was, and then I traced it along the ruler to make it straight. As I wanted to cut out that part evenly on both sides, I now pinned the front and back side of the top together. And then I simply cut it out along both lines. To make sure that I cut out my mesh fabric in the same size, I now measured the piece I just cut out on all sides. To cut out my mesh fabric as evenly as possible, I took out my ruler and my cutting mat and cut it with a rotary cutter. Now it's time to pin the new fabric to the old top on both sides. I made the pieces of the new fabric a bit wider to later be able to even out the edges on the side. When everything is pinned, now it's time to sew on the new fabric onto the bottom part of the top. For this I used my overlock machine, but you can also use an overlock stitch or a zigzag stitch on your regular sewing machine. Now I put both the bottom and top part onto my table and took out that scrap piece again I cut off earlier. And now I evened out the sides according to that scrap piece. As you see, now the top part matches that new piece of fabric, and what's left to do now is pin it in place. For this part again I used my overlock sewing machine. And now it looks like a top again. What's now left to do is to hem the side seams which are part of the armhole and to sew the side seam on the other side together. For all of this I used my regular sewing machine, and I started with the side seam that was not part of an armhole because that's easier, and I simply sewed it with a zigzag stitch. As on the other side I cut out a part of the armhole, this is now the trickier part that needs to be hemmed. I folded over the edge of the mesh fabric to the inside to match the hem of the existing top fabric. And then again I used the zigzag stitch to keep it elastic. As I use the mesh fabric that is see-through, the seam allowance might flip over and show on the outside. So what I wanted to do is top stitch it to keep it in place. So I put the top under my sewing machine with the right side facing, and then I made sure that the seam allowance was under the black part of it. I obviously also used the black thread, and then I just top stitched it in place. The top is basically done at this point, but I didn't like the length, so I decided to make it into a crop top. I laid the top flat onto my table, and as I decided to cut the top just below the part I newly sewed in, I just made sure that both sides aligned. And then I just cut off the bottom part along a straight line. To make the edges more neat before hemming, I also run it under my overlock machine. Now I just folded over the bottom edge to the inside and put it under my regular sewing machine and sewed it with a zigzag stitch. You see me stretching the fabric here as I found the bottom part a bit too loose, so I also sewed in an elastic band, but this part is obviously optional. And I'm done! I'm super happy with how the top turned out, and I want to do more of those kind of projects in the future. So follow me and stay tuned for more upcycling videos and other DIYs.